to the committee. So maybe just let me walk you through it, and it won't take very long. Um, we were we were fortunate enough to have a Google Earth image from July 3rd, Saturday, July 3rd, 2010, which gave us some at least some idea of how busy it gets on the 4th of July weekend, and certainly Saturday of that weekend would have been busy. And when I scrolled down and looked at Rehoboth Beach for that same exact day, it's just nothing but umbrellas across the entire Rehoboth Beach from, one end of the boardwalk to the other. So I think the image that we have of Lewis is a reasonable one that we use to get an idea of what the density of beachgoers is on a really busy weekend day in the summer. So, of course, the first thing we tried to do was I calculate what the square footage of usable beach space was, and we limited our analysis to the area from Bayview Avenue to the Roosevelt Inlet. And I know it varies from low tide to high tide. Um, Somebody just chatted July 10th, 2020. The image I'm talking about was from 2010, which
Right.
I know that's 10 years ago, roughly, but it's still, the middle of the summer. So we estimated that there was 307,000 square feet of usable beach space. And I know it varies from low tide to high tide. What the image we looked at was, it looks like it's low tide, and it appeared from the data that we assembled that it was low tide. So it's the max amount probably of 307,000 square feet. So from the imagery, we did an estimate, and what we came up with was that it looks like there's about 100 groups of beachgoers for every 50,000 square feet of usable beach space. So with the 25 blocks that we're talking about, it works out to be about 25 groups of people per block. So I'm just thinking about it, thinking that that's 13 groups on one side of a beach access path and 12 groups on another, and whether that makes sense or not. And, I'm not a gigantic Lewis Beach user, so I don't know, but the times I've been there, that sort of makes sense to me.
Can you
25
repeat that,
groups.
Charlie? I didn't quite hear what you said. 25 groups per block and 25 blocks.
Yep, 25 groups per block and 25 blocks.
And then something about how many groups on each side of a beach access.
So, I mean, if you just take 25 groups per block, it would be, as you walk onto the beach, you could say it's 13 on one side going to the right and 12 going to the left.
Got it. Thank you.
So it sort of makes sense to me. There's a lot of assumptions associated with an analysis like this, and one of them is like, well, how many people are in a group on the beach? And we've all been to the beach. We know some groups are 6 or 7. We know some groups are 1. But we used an average group size of 3. So 25 groups came up to 75 people per block. And what we came up with was roughly anywhere from 1,800 to 2,200 people on the busiest days of the summer across that length of Lewis Beach from Bayview Avenue to Roosevelt Inlet. So then when you back that down to 74 to 75 beachgoers per block, or 25 groups of 3 people, it really becomes difficult to translate that number into how many cars are trying to park on any particular side street leading to the beach. Because we all know that a significant number of the people on the beach are people who live on Lewis Beach. So, this could be up for debate, but what I said was that 50% of the people live on Lewis Beach and 50% drove to that point to get onto Lewis Beach. And I said that because I think I wanted it to be on the high side in determining the number of parking spaces that would be necessary to accommodate that number of people across the length of Lewis Beach. So at the end of the day, I came up with on the busiest day, on the busiest day of any particular summer day, or any summer, that you would have the need of 12 to 15 cars per block on the busiest day. And that's a starting point for our discussion. I know a lot of people are chatting about using a 2010 image. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions that go into something like this anyway. And I feel like, a Saturday on July 10th was probably pretty busy.
So Charlie,
maybe a little bit busier now.
Charlie,
But,
can I ask you a
yeah,
question?
sure.
Clarification. When you say 12 to 15 cars per block, does that mean for each of the state named and city named streets?
Yes. Yes.
Who else has questions?
Could you just, Charlie, thank you for sharing. Just could you amplify that answer? So this is the states, what we are calling the state streets and the city streets here on the Lewis Beach proper. What about Cedar Avenue? Does it include that as well?
Kevin, I think he's referring to city named streets. They would be the ones on the
Right,
canal.
I know the streets from Cedar to the Marsh and the streets from Cedar to the Bay.
No, it's a very good question. I think my answer to that would be is that if you were to go to Indiana Avenue, per my analysis, on the busiest day of the summer, you could need 12 to 15 parking spaces. They could be on Indiana Avenue. They could be on the city street that's either directly across or pretty nearly across Indiana Avenue, or they could be parked on Cedar Avenue, parallel parked on Cedar Avenue. So I think I can't tell you where those 12 to 15 are going to want to park, but it's anywhere they can get a parking space in the vicinity of Indiana Avenue. I hope that helps a little bit.
Okay.
So you didn't, yeah, okay. So, got it. I think I got it.
Now, I will say that everybody knows as you get towards the yacht club, the beach widens out. But that's tempered also a little bit by the fact that they have their own parking area. But also that parking area is shared not only with beachgoers, but people utilizing the pool that day at the yacht club. So it's a little tempered there. But I think it's a decent discussion. I'm not 100% sure through the meetings that we've had exactly where you want to go with this data. But my thought is that 12 to 15 parking spaces per block might be difficult to come up with. It's going to be tight.
And Charlie, just to follow up Kevin's follow-up,
Yeah.
would another way of saying this be 12 to 15 per block, less whatever parking can be found on Cedar itself?
No, I would say that it's 12 to 15 per block. And if you were to go halfway up from any state street towards the next state street, either east or west from Illinois Avenue or Kentucky Avenue, people could utilize those available spaces on Cedar Avenue to make up the 12 to 15.
That's what I meant, whatever I tried to say.
Okay.
Thanks. Other questions for Charlie?
I have a question. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for your analysis.
Sure.
The 12, 15 cars per block, how does that, obviously many homes have their own parking places and such.
Yeah.
For example, 2 parking spots. So your 12 to 15 presumably would mean that that includes those parking spaces as well, roughly? Or in addition to residents?
In addition to. in addition to. That's my estimate of the number of visitors to any particular State Street corridor on the busiest summer days.
That is visitors who aren't visiting a house that's on the beach.
Right.
Visitors from out of the area.
So that's
Well, I guess,
75 people.
yeah.
So that's 75 people who are occupying the beach per block. That number is just visitors? You're not incorporating residents into that number?
Let's see. It's the cars represent. I didn't tell you this, Khalil. I'm sorry. The cars represent 3 people per car.
Right.
So it's 12. Like if you say 12 cars, that's 36 people, which is roughly half of the 75 that are on that I said would be on the beach.
Right. And then, okay.
Yeah.
But
And
that number,
I just gave you a range of 12 to 15 cars just to be a little careful.
sure, of course. I understand this is not completely, fully vetted. So 75 people per block is estimated that those would be visitors, people who are not residents of Lewis Beach.
No, I'm saying 75 people are on the beach per block and half of those are visitors.
Half of those are visitors.
Yeah. Yep.
So, got it. So
Okay.
if it's up to 15 people, groups, that would mean 15, okay, you multiply that by 3.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for Charlie?
Yeah, yes, I have one. Charlie, I'm sorry if I missed this or misunderstood you, but
Mhm.
the 12 to 15 cars, is that just strictly on the beach side of Cedar, or does that include also across the street? We're just talking about,
Yeah. It could include across the street and along Cedar Avenue as well.
okay,
I mean, you guys live on the beach. You probably know this better than me, but I feel like if somebody wants to go to the beach on any particular State Street, they're going to find a space anywhere in that corridor, whether it's on the State Street, Cedar Avenue, or across Cedar Avenue on the canal side, is my guess.
So, Charlie, just to nail this down, I'm sorry because I may have misunderstood.
It's okay.
So let's say somebody wants to go onto the beach at Oregon. And
Mhm.
the block at Oregon, 12 groups to the right, 12 to the left of the beach access, is 75 people, of whom half are visitors. So
Correct.
those 36 visitors need 12 to 15 parking spaces. But they don't need to find 12 to 15 on Oregon. They can find some across Cedar, they can find some on Cedar, they can find some on Oregon. Is that-
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
So, Charlie, can I just try to organize this, at least in my thought pattern?
Sure.
Apologize, because I'm still struggling a little bit. So based upon a photo from 2010, is it your conclusion that there was adequate parking, public parking on the beach for people who were driving to the beach from someplace else on the busiest day of the summer?
It appeared to me, I'm going to pull it up though, because I don't want to speak out of turn. It appeared to me, Kevin, that, yeah, it did appear that there was enough parking, but let me look at that. Yeah, it's kind of strange. Like if you look at that, like New York Avenue's got a lot of cars parked parallel on it, but then you go right next door to New Jersey Avenue and there's hardly any, if any. it looks to me that, yeah, there is enough. But Kevin, that might speak to that, maybe I underestimated the number of residents that are on the beach that day. I said 50% were visitors. Maybe that's too high.
Well, I only asked this because I know this is from 2010, but things have happened since then, obviously. Some houses have been built, things are differently. We have no parking signage. So in making your calculations, did you also take into account wherever no parking is, where parking is prohibited on the 25 state streets for now on Lewis Beach? Did that?
No, I did
eliminate-
not. No.
That's going to eliminate the number. In other words, in a street where there is no parking on either side of a state street, that is going to make finding your 12 to 15 parking spaces in that area more difficult. Would you agree?
True. Yeah, but I think that would also affect the number of people that happen to be on the beach at that location too. Because if they can't find parking, the number will go from 75 down to 45. But I think it's a direct correlation, if you follow me.
Unfortunately, I did not know we would be having this discussion today. So I did not take a head count this past summer. But I think according to this analysis, in the 2-block area where Dennis and I live, everyone was actually exclusively on that beach. Although when you looked up and down the beach, it was umbrellas all up and down the beach. I think the beach has gotten more crowded in the last decade, based upon my experience and my experience of going to the beach every year during that decade. And I think that there's a lot more pressure on parking spaces today than there was before. And that adds in the inclusion.
You're
inclusion-
probably right about that.
And the inclusion of no parking signs, some of the building that has been permitted by the city, and so on and so forth. I think the pressure on spots. And I think that if you looked at where people were parking in 2010, Cleo may be able to speak to this, you will find it a lot more crowded on some of those spots in 2020, especially on busy days.
Yeah,
Well, I
and
can
it
just tell you-
wasn't that I didn't think about that. It was that I thought that when I came up with 12 to 15 required parking spaces, we were already pressing the limits of the space, available space with 12 to 15. So if we say that there's more people going on the beach in 2020 than 2010, it's only going to make the parking situation worse.
And again, I wasn't trying to presume what you thought of and not whatsoever. I was just making sure I wanted to understand the basis.
This is a
You did your
discussion.
analysis.
Yeah, this is a discussion, and I'm going to tell you right out of the gate that I'm not sure this is engineering, but I have a sense about it. But I really feel like any one of us could have made this estimation pretty much along the same lines.
Charlie, let me ask you a little bit about your 75 people per block estimate. Was that trying to crowd us the way Rehoboth is crowded? Was that trying to crowd it the way it was crowded from the satellite photo in 2010, or something different?
More from what we saw on the satellite photo of 2010, Rob, because what we did discover was that, remember when I told you that we estimated 100 groups per 50,000 square feet?
Yeah.
Remember I said that at the very beginning? If you look at, we went down and looked at Rehoboth Beach that same exact day. It was 360 groups per 50,000 square feet. So it was like almost 4 times the density of beachgoers. And, when I was looking at this, I was just trying to figure out things that made sense to me. And they probably make a whole lot more sense to you because you live on Lewis Beach, a lot of you. So you have a better sense of that sort of thing. But 4 times the density on Rehoboth from Lewis, it kind of made sense to me, I think.
Okay, well, Charlie, thank you. More questions? Then hearing none.
Well, I got a comment. I mean, and I think I'll reflect some of what the participants are texting in here, that using 2010 data really leaves out the fact that the beach is much more in demand. And on Sunday of this past Labor Day weekend, is all you could see was umbrellas from one end of the beach to the other. And not only that, increase in volume of people, but also the beach is not as deep as it used to be. And those 10 years, the sand dunes have grown significantly towards the water, and combined with sea level rise, it really, I think it brings into my question for me is, although we went through this nice analysis, Charlie, and thank you very much, I'm not sure how accurately it applies to today.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would certainly echo Dennis's comments. I mean, I think Charlie's analysis is actually is helpful, but I think we all know, and someone who's lived here for a good while, I mean, I don't think anybody would dispute the beach has gotten busier and busier every year. We haven't had any years in decrease or less patronage. I mean, everyone's coming to the beach, and Lewis is more popular than ever. And I don't think there's any trends out there that would indicate it's going to slow down over the next 5 or 10 years. So, and the beach is getting smaller. There's no question about that. At least from my experience, I don't know if, Kevin's mentioned this as well. So I think Charlie's information provides an interesting baseline for us to work from, but I do think 10 years is a long time, and we would probably have to take a look at more recent data, as well as, Charlie, I meant to ask you also, did you factor in like social distancing in terms of on the beach? Because you mentioned Rehoboth had umbrellas, on top of each other, you couldn't even see people.
We didn't factor in COVID social distancing. We factored in normal distancing that groups of people like to have between, their umbrella and the next one down the line.
Yeah.
But I will say this regarding your comments is that the idea that the beach is getting busier and more attractive for beachgoers might increase the number, but decreasing beach size would decrease the number. But maybe you're coming back to the baseline with with that discussion.
I have a question I'd like to ask. This is just an anecdotal question. I am not a member of the yacht club, so I do not have parking privileges there. But does the yacht club have sufficient space on its site to support all of its patrons, all of its members, so that all of them are parking up in the parking lot, or does some of their overflow come onto out onto Cedar?
I only know that this is anecdotally too. I know that when you go on to into the Lewis Yacht Club parking lot on a busy day, it's a little bit of the Wild West where people are parking all over the place just trying to find a space. I would say they probably have overflow on the busiest, but I don't know where they go. They might go down to the inlet. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, Tim, I've been there a number of times and drove through and seen, and the lot has been full, although I've been there probably 50% of the time, it wasn't full on a busy Saturday. It all depends on the time. Later in the afternoon, there's many more spots available as well. But I typically ride my bike down there. So
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Well, Charlie, thank you for your non-engineering analysis of this.
You're welcome.
Very useful. the thinking you, because you have personal experience also. Moving on to item C3. Clustering mailboxes. This should take about 1 minute. It was a recommendation of the first beach committee. And I think we're agreed that if we can cluster them, we want to, and Anne Marie is still looking into it. And is that right, Anne Marie?
That is correct.
Okay.
Would it be fair to say while Anne Marie is looking into it, though, there's pretty good evidence that mailbox clustering exists and is prominent throughout the Lewis Beach area?
And Kevin, thank you for the email demonstrating that. I think you're absolutely, based on what I can see, it looks absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving right along, C4. Kevin, can I ask you to take the lead on C4?
Sure. I thought this was worth raising. I think there are quite a few people who live in Lewis Beach, myself included, who would love if there was a bike lane, a well-established bike lane that came down Cedar or something comparable, or a bike path or something of that sort. I also think there's a recognition that what many people view, I believe, Rob, you had said this first, and if not, I apologize for assuming it was you. But what people assume is a bike lane is actually more of a parking lane that currently exists on Cedar. It's not a bike lane. And so there's quite a bit of confusion on that. Conversely, I think with the changes the city made with regard to Bay Avenue, if you go up onto Bay Avenue, you can go up and down the beach on Bay Avenue in both directions. So it has become, if you will, a de facto bike lane. And I think that while many of us would love to have adequate land to be able to have a really nice bike lane affiliated with Cedar Avenue, or a completely uniquely designated area for bike lanes, I don't think it would be possible in today's reality, given all the issues we're trying to address, to think that we could impose a bike lane on Cedar Avenue without really expanding up into people's yards on either side, because you would have to not only preserve the parking lane, you would then have to add a bike lane to it. So I just thought it was important that at least be acknowledged, given the strong interest in the community, but I think it may not be practicable at this time.
Let me ask you about that. You say you couldn't create a bike lane without getting into people's yards. There's, all we need is about 10 feet for a bike lane on the far side of the parking lane. And most places I see, there's all that is available without encroaching on anybody's yard.
Would this be, well, I also think that the one thing we all have learned from this exercise, it is impossible to hypothesize about the totality of Lewis Beach. It seems that every property is somewhat unique in its location on the property, the right-of-ways available, since so little on Lewis Beach when it comes to the city streets is dead even in between the two respective pieces of property. So I don't know, but I mean, I didn't know if the bike lane would be on both sides of Cedar or if you would do one or the other. But I do think that, and for the purposes of this committee, I don't think we would want to get into the sort of proposal and the detailed work it would take, given the number of properties that would be impacted if you were to retake some portion of the houses on one or both sides of Cedar to install an additional 10 feet of pavement.
I'm just thinking that your larger goal, I think, is to encourage people to bike rather than drive to the beach. And
I'm no. I mean, I realize. I mean, I don't think one can presume that at all. I don't want to get into the social economic issues involved in who would drive and who would park, or the population age issues and mobility issues and any of that. I just think it would be great if we could make it easy for people to bike to the beach. I do think a lot of people already bike to the beach. And I think with the next issue, we'd like to address that. I'd like to address that if I could. I just do know there was interest when this committee was started in having a long and robust look at the installation of a bike lane, an exclusive bike lane somewhere on Lewis Beach. I don't think, given the timeframes we're facing, or some of the other issues we're addressing, we're going to be able to take a really good, honest look into that right now.
Fair enough. Was that what you wanted to address about bikes, or was there more?
No, that was it. All I had. I don't know if others have other comments.
Okay.
Kevin, I
I
have a
would just echo-
question. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna sorry, Henry, I was just gonna echo Kevin's comment in a sense that considering all the trails that have been built over the last 5 to 10 years around here, you know, and I think I saw something in the chat about this, about Lewis being a biking town. I mean, I think it's totally consistent with what's been going on. And the more people on bikes and the less congestion, and again, less carbon emissions, you know, I think the better for everybody. But obviously bikes are not suitable for everyone. But I know there's certainly a segment of people in Lewis who do and have consistently biked to Lewis Beach regularly in the summer. But I think it's a good point, Kevin. And I think it's Rob and Tim and others. I think it's very consistent with what's going on in Lewis anyway, in terms of the bike trails. Thank you.
So I was going to suggest that maybe we ask the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee to put on a future agenda the discussion of bicycle safety along the Cedar Street corridor on Lewis Beach, to maybe start that discussion. And would you all be interested in having that? And it could be taken. I don't know that this committee would need to stay, but certainly I would hope that members of the committee would come and join in those discussions.
I would support that.
My concern about that is that if you're going to talk about a bike lane parallel to Cedar Street, you're going to be encroaching, as Kevin said, into a lot of right-of-ways. You'd be disturbing what's already there. I would be afraid if you're going to do that, you really have to involve the people that live over here in that discussion. We all know that if you put a bike lane adjacent to Cedar Street, then you cannot park a car in a bike lane. So what kinds of problems are you going to have if you're allowing parking adjacent to Cedar Street? And then on the bay side of that, you're going to have, perhaps you're going to talk about putting a bike lane. I think from a safety perspective, that would really bother me. That I think that would be putting people at risk. As Kevin said, we have a de facto bike lane on Bay Avenue because you can go both ways there.
I don't think it's necessarily asking them to look at a bike lane on Cedar, but maybe just bicycle safety in the area. So they may have other ideas that would be able to improve bicycle safety.
Honestly, in the summertime, I don't think there is such a thing as bicycle safety on Cedar. Not during the height of of the busy season, July and August. There's no way I would want to be on Cedar on a bicycle. That's taking your life in your hands.
I'll piggyback on that. And when we talked about making Bay Avenue both ways on bicycles, one of the big factors was that you didn't force people over to Cedar Street to bike. And it was a big safety issue keeping them on Bay Avenue and off of Cedar.
I just would like to, though, go back to something Emery said, and if there is another qualified committee looking at this, I think that would be great. If you want to add it to the agenda, and I think I join with Khalil, if there's a way we can help out, I'd be happy to participate.
Linda, following up your point, that it's not safe to bike in high season, do people bike anyway?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, they do. And not so much to go to the beach, they're just biking to go biking. But, you know, you have people parallel parking on Cedar and, you know, they're anxious to get to the beach and they fling their doors open and you have a bicyclist coming out in front of you because they're trying to avoid getting hit. So you know, we've seen some pretty close calls on Cedar.
Okay. Anything else on the subject of bicycles on Lewis Beach? Thank you, Kevin. Um, So we're on to item C5. We're making progress better than I thought we would. C5 is bike racks and trash cans at beach entrances. And Kevin, I think you wanted to speak to this too.
I think building upon the discussion we just had, and I think a collective interest on all of us, whether it's high volume days or low volume days, to encourage people to bike to the beach and have a safe place to store their bikes. I think it would be great if this committee could include in its recommendations to the city to begin the installation of some bike posts. Charlie, help me out here. I think the correct term is a bike bollard. Is that correct? Or, but some bike posts around access.
rack.
Bike rack. Well, I don't know if you want to get into like a 10 bike rack as opposed to a bike post, which is like 2 or 3,
Right.
something like that. But as a way of beginning to encourage people and provide an opportunity for them to bike to the beach and know their bike will be safe.
Now, Kevin, is this primarily to allow bikes a place to park, or is it to prevent cars from parking?
No, I think if you're looking at beach access areas, this would be a place to put your bike, lock it up so you're nice and safe and secure, and you're encouraging a place to put it. So not all of us like lugging bikes over the dunes down to the beach. Or maybe that's just me.
I mean, I can certainly mention that, near where I live, routinely there are bikes chained to stop signs and other signs in the area, usually 1 or 2 bikes chained there because people have ridden obviously from a remote area to Lewis Beach, and that's typically where they keep their bikes. So, I mean, I think it's certainly worth looking into, and I think it'd be a good policy to have people, at least encouraging people to use their bikes in accessing Lewis Beach.
And would that
I
go?
have a question for Kevin. Kevin, is there a reason why you seem to be a proponent of the use of a bike bollard, and I understand what that is. But the capacity of a bollard was much more restrictive than a bike rack. Is there a reason why you are suggesting a bollard?
Sure, Tim, and I'm not an engineer, so can we use the word post? Because every time we start talking
Sure.
about bollards, I no longer know what the hell we're talking about. That'd be
Okay,
great.
sure, we can use a
And
post.
so I was trying to do something that would not be intrusive, that would be able to at least begin the process of encouraging the use and support of bike traffic to the beach, but without getting into a 25-foot bike rack that would cross the entire access route or something of that sort. So I'm not, don't want to get into the engineering of it, but I think that to the degree you're talking about a small rack or a bike post, a bike bollard, if there's a difference between a post and a bollard, anything to get it started would be a great improvement for the city in this area. I have not
Thank
ruled
you.
anything out. I was trying to come
Sure.
up with the right words, man.
Okay, thank you.
A question. Anne Marie, the bike racks at the main beach 1 and 2 and the inlet, do they get much use? Do you know?
They do. They get used.
Would it be an idea to increase the number of bike places at those locations?
I know when we paved Beach 2 parking lot, we did increase. We can look at that, but again, I think, some people, regardless of what's there, are going to want to come up
Yeah.
to the other areas of the beach.
No, I
So-
wasn't saying instead of, I agree with Kevin, to put
Okay.
these posts down here. And I would kind of stagger them just to see what kind of use they get. And if they get used, then we could increase the numbers. But I wasn't exclusive one of the other. It was just in addition to.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly look at that. More closely monitor the use in the coming summer so that we can get a sense. Maybe even consider, I know with Beach 2, Charlie, didn't we put something closer up to the beach? Like in Beach 1, the major bike rack is back by the bathhouse, but
Yeah,
Beach 2, I think we put something up
we
closer.
did, yeah, and it lent itself a little better to it because of the way it's configured, but yeah, we did.
This may kind of lead into signage. It would be good for bicyclists to know where the racks are. And it would be good also to direct them towards Bay Avenue for biking. So maybe there is signage that can be bike parking specific. I think there is such. And signs perhaps suggesting that bikers use Bay Avenue. Does that sound like of interest to the committee?
Yes,
There already is some signage on for bikes on Bay Avenue. I think it is a picture of a person on a bicycle going in both directions. So I think there already exists, Rob, some sign.
Okay, so maybe it's just the bike parking signs I'm thinking about. Because if we don't have them at every beach access point, which I think Dennis is suggesting might be premature, we might want them so
To know where they are.
we didn't talk about the trash cans at the access points.
Thanks.
And I'd just like to comment on that. We have the trash cans on the beach, which the city picks up, I think, twice a week during the summer. And oftentimes those trash cans, when they're full, people put the trash alongside of them.
Mhm.
And it includes things that I certainly wouldn't want to see a trash can next to Bay Avenue at a beach access point with that kind of stuff around. And it would increase the requirements of the city to pick all that up. So I would suggest that we stay with the trash cans on the beach that we have. And if they seem to be, there need more of them, maybe they could pick them up more frequently, but that's something Anne Marie can look at as the summer goes on.
So you're saying you would not want trash cans at the beach access points?
Close to Bay, that's correct.
Dennis, how often did you say they empty the cans now that are up along the beach?
I believe it's twice a week. Is that correct, Anne Marie?
I think it's more frequently than that now. We increased it and we added some in other areas. You know, in some places we have 2 or 3. I know we always get them on Mondays. Sometimes we get them on Saturdays as well. And then we typically get them, I think, on Wednesdays and Fridays. So I'd say at least 3 times a
Good.
week.
Yeah, and then of course the city trash men are over there on the streets picking up trash twice a week from the residents as well. So any can that would be along the public access along Bay could be picked up twice a week, right?
So what we have on the beach, they're barrels. So they're accessed differently.
Right.
So that is something, if there's an interest in putting, you know, cans, we have the large black carts
Right.
in the beach parking lots. You know, we could potentially put those at some of the access points, and we would chain them to a post so they don't go missing. And then they could be picked up when trash is picked up. But I think what Dennis was saying is, from his perspective, he'd prefer not to have
Correct.
trash receptacles.
I
in that area,
understand.
right?
Yeah, I have a question I'd like to ask the members of the committee who live along Bay. I am aware that Bay is one way. I am aware that a lot of people walk on Bay, and I'm aware that people ride bikes on Bay. I've ridden my bike on Bay. So I have that life experience. My question is, bikes are supposed to ride according to traffic laws. and Bay is marked one way southbound. So my question is, as someone who pulling out of your driveways, pulling out of your garages, et cetera, to drive on Bay, do you find that having bikes coming in both directions is problematic and possibly a safety concern that needs to be raised at this time?
I'll speak to that. Kevin and I both live on Bay Avenue.
Right.
And my experience is that they changed the direction of Bay Avenue when they redid it. I guess it was about 2011.
Right.
And the city made Bay Avenue a multimodal street about 4 years ago. And in the last 4 years, I have not found it problematic at all entering onto Bay Avenue from my house. And I've not heard anyone offer any comments, negative comments about it. Mostly I have gotten positive comments because it doesn't force bicyclists over onto Cedar. And we have a lot of little kids that use that. We have rollerbladers, roller skates, joggers, walkers, just people taking babies in carriages out there. And it has not been problematic from my perspective. Kevin, you may want to comment.
No, I think, again, it's much busier at certain days, Tim, and others, but it's also at 10 miles an hour. And most people will only go a block on Bay before turning off, except for the cruisers. And that seems to pick up in non-busy times. But yes, it's full. It would be better if there was a discreetly designated bike path or bike lane up and down Lewis. I think that would be the dream for all bike enthusiasts, but I also think there's a bit of a reality here. So I think this is perhaps the best way to accommodate it. But again, anything I think we can do that will encourage people not to drive over here, but to use bicycles or alternative methods for getting to this area would be a plus.
Thank you. Thank you.
So are we on to C6?
Well, how does this work, Rob? I mean, we've had a discussion about this. I don't know what goes into the recommendation or how we decide what goes into the recommendation.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Good point. Let's see if we have a consensus on a particular outcome. I think I'm hearing general consensus that putting at least small bike racks or bike posts up at least a few of the entrances for an initial year would be a good step towards trying to encourage bicycling to the beach.
I would agree with that.
I would support that
as
as
well.
well.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you, Rob.
Well, thank you. And then we might as well hit trash cans. I didn't hear a consensus about trash cans. I heard Dennis, but Dennis doesn't want spillage from trash cans that are too small and not picked up often enough. I don't know whether it's just the unsightliness of the trash can itself that you don't like, Dennis.
No, it's not that. It's the odor.
The odor?
Emanating from it. And people don't treat it as if it was their own garbage. They don't treat it the same way. And sometimes when you walk down the beach, what they leave there, you don't want to walk by. I mean, Linda and Kevin, you guys have probably experienced the same thing.
I think it would be fair to say, based upon this conversation, there's not the same enthusiasm for trash receptacles as there is for bike posts. So maybe we should leave it at bike posts for now.
Well put, Kevin. Thank you.
I think part of the problem that Dennis is pointing out is that in addition to the odor, one of the observations we have is that people feel with a public trash receptacle that as long as they're within 3 feet of it, they're close enough. Where, if it were your own property, you're making sure you put it in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anne Marie, if we, I think the discussion has been based upon the premise
You're breaking up.
it would be a barrel rather than like a super. Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Now we can, but we missed most of what you said.
I'll start again. What I'm wondering is if with an open, with no lid, if there was a super can placed out along the access point where a lid had to be lifted and for a refuse to be put in, would that remedy the odor problem that Dennis is speaking of, the unsightliness, et cetera? Would that help mitigate that?
It could to some degree. I mean, we still see in the beach parking lots where if the cans are full, people will put the trash near.
Sure. We see that on 2nd Street, you know, in a busy weekend, those cans are overflowing also, you know, so it happens. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's worth signage that says where we do have cans to say, you know, if the can is full, please take your garbage with you. I mean, I don't understand what's so hard about that. If it's full, take
Right.
it.
I
But,
understand.
You know, I think it's either you let people throw away their trash or you're carry in, carry out. And I'm not sure that with the population of people that comes to Lewis Beach, I think there would be a huge learning curve because they've been so accustomed to having a place to throw away their trash.
Okay. I think Kevin was right that we don't have a consensus on this. But we're now, Kevin, we're at another one of your suggested agenda items, which I think we've always had all along, but you asked for it to be on this agenda. In particular, current no parking signage and placement policy. May I ask you to speak to that, or would you rather?
No, I would be happy to speak to that. This is one of those issues I think is we have touched upon repeatedly throughout the committee's tenure. I also think that there are more issues involved than this committee can totally address, because some of these issues have to do with policy of the city, whether written or not, as well as state laws and so on. So I just wanted to do, I shared a survey I did with that I was able to do of the state streets, and looking at what has a no parking sign, what doesn't, where there are no parking sign opportunities and so on. And I think it's pretty clear, it's a little hard to determine what the uniformity of the policy currently in place. It seems to be very selective. There's not all emergency access streets are not treated the same. Now, Lewis is a very unique place, and that's, I think, part of its charm. Nothing is homogeneous over here. It roams around street to street, block to block, and I don't want to interfere with that whatsoever, but it's a little hard at times to know why some places have no parking signs, others don't, and what have you. So I just thought it would be helpful with us, especially given some of our other discussions, if we include in our recommendation to the city a suggestion that when it comes to no parking signage, that it becomes more uniform and consistent, and that priority be given to the placement of signs, to the protection of public safety, emergency vehicle access, and ensuring that when parking is heavy, that every street is still accessible to vehicle traffic. When we used to live on East Canal, where there's parking allowed on both sides, in the heavy days of the summer, it's almost impossible to get a car up and down it. And I'm not talking about an ambulance. If there's an ambulance, everyone's going to have to be running around because you could not get an ambulance down the street. So again, I think that as the city moves forward with its policy with regard to where it installs no parking signs, that I think there should be sort of a clear, consistent process for how we're going to treat the different streets while preserving the three items I mentioned, or taking into account the priority of the three items that I just mentioned.
Kevin, I think you have this in the form of a motion. It's rather long. Would you mind saying it again and perhaps letting Janine have it by email if she doesn't already?
I would be happy to do it, although I think it's very unfair of you, Rob, to encourage me to send an email while reading out loud. That's not going to happen. I move that the committee include in its recommendation to the mayor and the city council that the use of no parking signage in Lewis Beach be uniform and consistent, and that priority be given in the placement of signs to the protection of public safety, emergency vehicle access, and ensuring that when parking is heavy, that every street is still accessible to vehicle traffic. I will now, Janine, try to send it to you.
Discussion of that. Well, first of all, is there a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Discussion.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on it. I think that that the city needs to take a look at the signage that we have, and the language should be consistent on each street, and really review each street, because one example is Massachusetts was a emergency access street, and because it was so small, we moved it from Massachusetts to Market, which is very wide, and it's really was a really good move. And they moved the sign that said emergency access from Massachusetts to Market. But at the end of Massachusetts, towards Bay Avenue, there's two signs that say no parking between here and Bay Avenue for 50 feet. Those signs need to be removed. So that kind of thing exists. And Anne Marie, I don't know anybody knows these streets as well as I do, serving on a number of the committees that did it. I would be more than happy to work with whomever, to Ricky, and look at these streets and see what we could do to make that, to help that along.
Okay, be careful, because we may take you up
No,
on that.
I honestly, I mean,
what-
I'm serious, so we can get it straightened out.
One observation I have is that everything about parking is addressed in the code, like all of the, where there's no parking on one side, no parking on both sides, that's in the code. There is nothing in the code about emergency access streets. So that idea of no parking within 50 feet of the stop sign on an emergency access street, it's not codified. So there's nothing, the signs are there, but they're, you know, in 10 years, 20 years, you know, the purpose of why those signs are there is likely lost. So I don't know if there's some benefit to designate in the code the emergency access streets, and if that 50 feet needs to stay in place, that should be specified in code, because otherwise, I mean, even with a street paving project, my guess is that the signs would likely be moved.
I honestly believe that that's what we should do, is take a look at that. And if that was implemented when they redid Bay Avenue, and it wasn't put in the code, as you say. And I think that we should the city should take a look at that and see if they want to put it in the code. And if they do, then make it an ordinance, as you say, address it and put it into the streets parts there. I think that'd be a really good thing to put on the agenda for the city council.
Kevin, I have a clarifying question. In the motion, that includes not just the Bayside side streets, but also the Marsh side streets of Cedar, all streets?
I would hope so. I actually, when I drafted the motion, the last clause was intended to address the situation you have discussed with the committee, as well as my own experience on East Canal.
Okay. I just want to ensure that, because to my knowledge, I don't know hardly any streets on the Marsh side that have no parking on one side. They seem to all be, parking on both sides, and I've mentioned before, similar experiences you had on East Canal with it, let alone, anybody, even a bicycle trying to get through there is worried about someone opening their door inadvertently and knocking them over. So, but thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Any further discussion on Kevin's motion? Hearing none, and we had a second from Dennis. All in favor?
I,
Aye.
Any opposed?
I am opposed.
Okay. Tim, did you want to speak to your thinking or just leave it as
I'll
a,
leave it as it is.
okay. Then we've got, the next item is C7, parking enforcement. And I think that what we've been talking about is that, as Khalil has termed it, we have the Wild West in the high season, for people looking for places to park. We're also,
Wild. There's two wilds in that. Wild, Wild West.
Wild West. So we're looking for some, or at least I gather the sense is we're looking for some help from the city in putting teeth into the rules on parking, such as within 30 feet of a stop sign on Cedar, such as not in front of people's driveways, and whatever, and the other rules that apply. And I think that we've heard the chief be open to recommending again that that we resume a seasonal police officers, and perhaps we've had at times 2 of them, at times 4. Right? We may even be, I don't know what's what you're going to put in the budget, Anne Marie, but I
I know what he's requesting. I don't know what's going to make it into the draft. He's asking for 10.
Right.
Now,
that's a lot.
and again, if there's going to be a strong parking enforcement in this area, that may be, that may take up more time.
Well, there's also the possibility of not just seasonals, but parking enforcement people on the beach too. So is it the sense of the committee that we would like to see more personnel resources assigned to enforcing the parking restrictions on Lewis Beach?
I'll comment on that. I am in agreement with that. And I think not only will it have an impact on people parking where they shouldn't, the fire plugs and in the yellow lines, but also I think a police presence might have a very positive impact on the negative behavior of some of the visitors to the beach.
That is beyond our jurisdiction, but it's a good point.
Rob, as you know, in my sentiment on this is not just an increased police thing. I think one of the challenges we have seen is that the parking rules that do exist have not really been enforced to date. And some of the proposals made by the previous committee did not fare as well because there was no enforcement. So I hope as we word this, we can look to making sure it is broad and we make it clear that if we're going to, as we address parking on Lewis Beach, not only with regard to some of the other items we talked about, like a permit system or designated areas, or people who park in prohibited areas, that we make sure that we want the rules enforced. And that was in my book, the real important message to be sent here. You can't have all of this work done and these rules established if they aren't enforced.
I would think that went without saying, but apparently it doesn't. It's your sense that it's been lip service to parking rules?
Well, I've tried to avoid the pejorative nature of that last comment, but I think that more can be done to make sure that that the city enforces the rules that's established, especially as we've talked about. We're going to be making recommendations with regard to a permit system. We're going to be making recommendations with regard to designated parking spaces. We've talked about addressing people who are parking in the orange or yellow lines on Cedar and things of this sort. If we're going to have these rules, they need to be enforced. And it may be self-evident to some, but experience would dictate that it's not self-evident to all.
Good. Any other discussion on this? Is it fair to say we have a consensus on this without needing a motion? Consensus that we're asking for more personnel to enforce parking rules on Lewis Beach.
Correct.
Yes.
And that the rules and and that the rules that are in place are enforced. What I would like to, and I'd be happy to make a motion if you'd like, but I want to make sure that the concept here is not just hiring more police. The concept is that the city makes an effort and ensures that if it's creating new rules regarding parking, that it is also making sure that those rules will be enforced by the city.
Does anybody object to that being part of the consensus? No, then
Okay.
I think
Chief Spell is on the call, and if I can find him, he can, I can't find him on here. He did say he's listening though.
I'm sorry. You're talking about Anne Marie?
Chief Spell
Oh.
is, I believe, on the call. And I think he wants to address that, if I can find him in the, oh, there he is. Do you mind if I allow him to speak?
Please do.
Chief, you should be able to speak.
There I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So while I, wholeheartedly, support and agree with the motion, from a police perspective, it's a task that I don't want to give overconfidence to. With our current resources, it's I don't want to say impossible, but extremely difficult with 1 to 2 police officers covering the entire city, on a weekend shift. It's really difficult, if not impossible, to be able to dedicate the time and resources that I think you want there to do that task. I just want to put that out there.
Chief, I'm not quite sure I follow. You're saying with your current staff, it's not practicable, but you're not saying that with seasonal staff it would be a problem, are you?
It'd be much more manageable with seasonal, whether that be seasonal police officers or seasonal parking enforcement additions that we've talked about.
Do you see either as being more appropriate than the other?
Probably parking enforcement. It's a more dedicated just to that task that I think you're asking for, as opposed to a seasonal police officer could be doing a bunch of different things.
And I guess seasonal police officers would likely be cadets who would be anxious to do other stuff too.
Yes.
Chief, one question I have is if parking enforcement officers were assigned to that area and they see other poor behavior, would they be able to address some of that? Because that was one of the comments that I think Dennis made, that, it's not just parking, there are other problems. It's just that parking is the scope of this committee.
Yeah, I guess parking kind of starts the other problems because of the volume of people. And you did mean Dennis Reardon, not Dennis Crawford. Okay. So, it's a tough position to put a parking enforcement officer in because of, the nature of their status, I guess. They can certainly have communications with us and get us there to address it. So it could have some effect, yes.
I should think just the presence of somebody in uniform would tend to discourage people from bad behavior.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, I think we're done with C6, and to my great surprise, we have a little bit of time left just to talk about alleys. And this is something that is too big a topic for us to really deal with. Really, the question, I think, is do we want the city, well, we know some people do, I don't know if everyone does, who has an alley behind their house. Do we want the city to think about starting to clear some of the alleys so that people who live on them can get into the backs of their houses, and so that the city's trash and recycling people can pick up trash from behind the houses rather than in front? This is something that's worth exploring.
I can speak to that a little bit. I actually don't have any experience with that, nor has anyone contacted me about that, about the issue of alleys. I mean, I saw that on the agenda and I was curious about the origins of it, but that is one area I have to admit that I just haven't heard a lot of conversation about or concern about or anything. It's interesting.
Just speaking personally, I've heard from a couple of people who do live on an alley that say, isn't it the city's job to keep them clear? That's about as much discussion as I've had of it, besides walking down a couple of them. There's at least one that's nicely kept and well used for exactly those purposes. There's at least one that you can't even see because it's so overgrown. So there's a wide range between those two extremes.
And I would just add one interesting little twist if we were to do this. If people start to rely on an alley to access their property and that alley is unimproved, we will likely end up with demand for that alley to be improved at some point. So, and we wouldn't use an alley for trash trucks if it was unimproved. There are a few places where unfortunately we have to, but there are kind of two sides of what happens if we were to do that.
I didn't realize that. I'm only aware of one improved alley on Lewis Beach, but that may be.
I think you're right. There's one improved alley and we do use it for trash collection.
Oh,
There are two over here.
Oh,
One is between Oregon and Kentucky, which they use for trash, and the other is between Kentucky and Ohio, where they go up to pick up trash. So there are two right here. But I haven't heard anyone ask for alleys to be cleared for those purposes. But it did come up in a previous meeting where one gentleman asked about who trims the alley at the Cedar Street end, so that people can park on Cedar. And I think that's a question that the city can address.
And if the adjacent property owners aren't doing it, we can either send them notice to do it or do it ourselves.
Yeah. Rob, that was what he was asking, because he said he would do it, but he wasn't sure he was permitted to.
So Anne Marie, is it like a sidewalk? Is an alley the adjacent owner's problem? I thought it was a city problem.
Unless they're used, unless the city needs them for a reason, we do not go in and clear them or maintain them.
That's just a policy thing though, isn't it, Anne Marie, a practice? That's.
I don't know what the code states.
Right.
Okay. So this is, as I thought, this is a subject that will take a lot more time to explore than we have. But I thought I'd raise it, and thank you for the information, Dennis. And my inclination is to think the city could probably do more here to make those alleys usable for the people who live on them.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
I just know there are a number of places in town where we have unimproved alleys that people use to access their properties. As they get rutted and accumulate water and become uneven, we're getting, people expect the city then to come in and improve it. So
is that wrong? I mean, is that a bad idea?
that's a judgment call. I think that it's something we'd probably want to have discussion about. It in an area where we have some drainage problems already. Do we want to pave more area and add more impervious cover in an area where now the rain's going into the ground? I mean, those are the types of judgment calls that need to be made. I mean, I think it could certainly be worth discussion, but I think it's something that council would have to really just, evaluate.
Right, I wasn't actually thinking about paving them, but you can
Right.
take away the ruts without paving something. Okay, well, I think that this has been a really good session, I think. And I think it's our last before we discuss a draft report, which I'm going to get out in the next couple of days. And that'll be on the 26th. Janine, the chat traffic was very heavy today. And just like last time, I expect to find it useful. Can you please email to all of us the chat transcript? Janine, I think you're muted, but I see your head nodding, so that's great.
Yes, I will email that.
Okay,
Emery, if you could send it to me.
thanks.
Thank you.
And I do want to say, we had a little glitch with the recording when it jumped from my computer to Janine. So I think that the very beginning of the meeting may not show in the recording.
Okay, well, I will make sure to read those if I, well, of course,
No, the chats are all there. The chats will all be there. It's just
Okay.
the recording of the meeting.
all I cared about was the transcript.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Yes, Dennis.
I'd just like to give a shout out to Janine for a nice job on the minutes. Thank you very much, Janine.
Thanks, Janine.
You're welcome.
You're here. Anything else from anybody? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Have a good
Thank you.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.